Good evening and welcome to the City of Mississauga's live virtual information session on how we are tackling the housing crisis in our city and working to make housing more affordable. My name is Rob Trewartha and I'll be your moderator for tonight's session. Moving forward, I would like to share our Indigenous land statement. We acknowledge the lands which constitute the present-day City of Mississauga as being part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot nations. We recognize these people and their ancestors as people who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The City of Mississauga is home to many global Indigenous peoples. As a municipality, the City of Mississauga is actively working towards reconciliation by confronting our past and our present, providing space for Indigenous peoples within their territory to recognize and uphold their treaty rights and to support Indigenous peoples. We formally recognize the Anishinaabe origins of our name and continue to make Mississauga a safe space for all Indigenous peoples. I'd now like to take a few minutes to review the agenda for tonight's information session and walk through some of the logistics for our virtual meeting. We'll start with opening remarks from Mayor Bonnie Crombie and members of council, followed by a presentation from our Commissioner of Planning and Building, Andrew Whittemore. Andrew will walk us through the city's response to the Ontario government's recent housing reports and legislation and the actions Mississauga is taking to build more housing and make it more affordable. After the presentation, we look forward to taking your questions and explaining what you can do to stay informed and engaged. I'd like to welcome our City Manager, Paul Mitchum, members of our leadership team, and senior staff who are standing by to answer any questions you might have. For those participating on our WebEx meeting, if you wish to submit a question, you can do so by including it in the Q&A section on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Your question will not appear on the screen, but we will collect them throughout the session and do our best to answer as many questions as possible this evening. Finally, please note that tonight's session is being recorded. The recording will be posted on our mississauga.ca/housing website after the event. With that, I'd like to introduce Her Worship, Mayor Bonnie Crombie. Mayor Crombie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to all our residents for joining us this evening and for this very important and very topical conversation. First, let me please allow me to introduce and acknowledge all of the councillors who are joining me tonight. We almost have a full house. From Ward 1, Councillor Stephen Dasco. Stephen, give a wave, please. From Ward 2, Councillor Pat Mullen. From Ward 3, Councillor Chris Fonseca. From Ward 5, Councillor Carolyn Parrish. From Ward 8, Councillor Matt Mahoney. From Ward 9, Councillor Pat Sado. And from Ward 11, our chair of our planning committee, Councillor George Carlson. So thank you as well for joining us. I know that housing affordability is a pressing issue for many residents. It's a top priority of mine and for our councils. Our priority is to ensure that everyone who wants to live in Mississauga and put down roots can afford to do so. Since we first booked this meeting, a lot has changed. As some of you may know, the province has recently introduced legislation, Bill 109, More Homes for Everyone Act. This bill includes several of the recommendations included in the province's Housing Affordability Task Force, which was released in February. I will refer to this going forward as the task force report from here on in. There's a lot of pressure here. The government has been clear the task force report will serve as their roadmap for planning and housing policy for the next 4 years. The proposed legislation is the first phase of their plan to address housing affordability. While there's some very solid recommendations in the task force report, some elements are concerning, which we will address this evening. Our main concern is that responsibility for the housing crisis is being placed directly at the feet of the municipalities, and we fundamentally disagree with this positioning. While there is room for all of us, including municipalities, to make improvements and changes, cities are only one actor. The provincial and federal governments, the development industry, the financial institutions, they all play a role in tackling this crisis, and we must work together. I want to quickly provide a brief overview of the actions we've taken to address housing affordability because I think it's important that everyone on the call has a picture of the work that we've been undertaking on this front. And I want to be clear. Mississauga is committed to not only building more housing, but ensuring that the housing is affordable for everyone, regardless of your income level. We created our own affordable housing strategy called Making Room for the Middle to help make housing more affordable in our city and province for middle income families. We have made progress on this plan, including securing affordable units in new developments by negotiating with developers and implementing inclusionary zoning, simplifying the process for second units such as basement apartments or in-law suites, protecting the supply of rental housing by securing existing rental from demolition or conversion to condominium without permit, making surplus lands available to affordable housing providers first, exempting development charges for affordable rental units, excuse me, and recommending reduced parking requirements, and looking at ways to increase housing options through gentle intensification, such as townhomes, stacked townhomes, laneway suites, garden suites, or garage conversions. We can't deny that Mississauga is growing and changing, and I think the work that we're doing here at the city reflects that shift. We are Canada's 7th largest city, and while we were originally designed as a bedroom community where people could easily commute to the Big Smoke while living in a large, detached 4-bedroom home, as we grow and as we work to tackle the affordability crisis, we need to start to think differently. We have a plan to welcome growth and density to our city in a way that will see more housing built in Mississauga in places where it makes sense, like in the downtown core, in the waterfront on reclaimed land, and around our major transit areas, as well as in existing neighborhoods, but where it can be properly accommodated. Our plans for these areas alone will accommodate for around 156,000 units for the next 30 years. We are doing what we can, and we have a plan to make housing more affordable and provide a greater diversity of options for residents, but we need help from other levels of government. And that's why we're so concerned with the task force report and Bill 109. When you read both, you are given the impression that the solution to the housing crisis rests with municipalities alone. And the municipalities bear all the blame. And that is simply not the case. There is no mention of the role that the development community may play, or that of the province, or the federal government, all who have a role to play. As a city, we are not slowing down development. In fact, we are meeting development application approval times 95% of the time, which is pretty incredible. And we have over 60,000 units ready to go with zoning in place that can be built quickly. Why are they all not built yet? Well, that's a good question, but that question should be asked from the development industry. At a very high level, our concerns with the task force report and legislation are as follows. Too much focus on the municipalities, reducing in some cases and eliminating public consultation altogether, erasing heritage protections. Legislation will not automatically increase supply, and building more housing does not guarantee that it will be affordable or appropriate for families. The proposed changes will result in more red tape and administrative responsibilities for municipalities, and a greater burden will be placed on existing taxpayers. We will lose the ability to build complete, healthy communities, including providing adequate parkland and green space. The proposals are a one-size-fits-all approach for the province and ignore what makes cities and neighborhoods unique and the important role that community feedback plays in building complete communities. We can build more housing and increase affordability without losing what makes our communities great. I do want to allow time for the presentations and for councillors to provide their thoughts on each of your questions that pertain to their awards as well. I'm looking forward to the discussion and taking questions later in the session. This is one of the most pressing issues that we face as a city, and it's important that everyone is around the table to provide their input. And now I'd like to turn it over to Andrew Whittemore, our Commissioner of Planning and Building, for his comments. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So housing affordability, not unlike city planning, is a very complex subject that has actually been studied for years. Many opinions have been offered on how best to address the problem. And the recent reports from the province have really been just the latest in a long list of series of ideas to address housing affordability. In fact, Bill 109 is the seventh major change to planning legislation in the last 7 years. So my presentation today will aim to provide a little bit of context and understanding on the task force recommendations and the government's latest proposed legislative changes. So Mississauga, like most parts of the country, as the mayor just mentioned, is facing a housing crisis. Today, the average price of a single detached dwelling is $1.9 million, while a condo comes in close to about $750,000. To rent a two-bedroom apartment in the city, prices can range from $1,600 for units in a purpose-built rental apartment up towards $2,600 for units rented privately in a condo or a townhouse. Mississauga's real estate prices are increasingly each year. We look back over the last several years and we can see the prices have jumped by as much as 8% all the way through to 15 to 16% in the last 2 years. Despite what we read as of late, housing affordability has been an issue for decades, and sometimes worse than others. As you see from this graph, housing prices were very high during the late 80s and 90s. In 1993, the housing market collapsed. A price increase remained relatively stable until 2015. And this is what we begin to see a sharp rise in prices and what we are experiencing today. There's been considerable dialogue and varying expert positions on housing supply and the role it plays in housing affordability. As example, the Provincial Task Force report suggests supply is a primary issue impacting housing affordability. In Mississauga, we can see how our housing growth has ebbed and flowed over the years and how our housing form has changed. On the slide, the bar in blue represents apartment-style housing, while the green represents ground-related housing, such as single dwellings, duplex, and townhouses. The majority of housing supply in Mississauga, as far back as 1966, has been ground-related housing. And this is because most of Mississauga was unbuilt at that time and land was readily available. However, you'll see beginning in 2000, we take a drastic shift and the predominant housing form becomes apartment style, which is the case today. The previous slides illustrate the complexity of housing affordability. For instance, while we were experiencing some of the highest housing growth during certain years, we were also experiencing some of the highest prices. So why was this? Well, it really speaks to the complexity of land development and real estate economics. Housing affordability is not simply influenced by supply. Rather, there are many variables that influence housing costs. Market trends, market preference, interest rates, financing, the cost of land, the cost of materials, the fees developers pay, and even the availability of qualified labor. All of these contribute to the prices we're experiencing today. In fact, when you consider that 75% of the cost to build any home or unit today is basically fixed, you really begin to understand that supply does not necessarily equate to more affordable homes. So now let's turn our attention to the task force recommendations and the proposed legislation the province has tabled to address affordability. As I mentioned, the province has recently released 2 significant reports that will serve as their roadmap to addressing the housing affordability crisis. In February, the Housing Task Force was released, which was shortly followed by Bill 109, More Homes for Everyone. The latter includes amendments to the Planning Act and a few other pieces of legislation, and various steps the government plans to take in the coming months and years to intervene in the affordable housing. The report key assumption is a housing supply is the issue, and so the majority of the recommendations are aimed at addressing this. The report assumes planning policies and regulations, development and building approval process, and municipal fees are the key driver of the supply issue. There is also a focus on engagement and community opposition and the rights of community in the planning process that are assumed to be a significant barrier to efficient planning process and delivering housing. The report also states a goal of needing 1.5 million houses in the next 10 years and provides over 55 recommendations to get there. So if we put aside the basic assumption that supply will solve the affordability issue, there are some generally good planning themes and several recommendations where city planning staff are in alignment with the task force. And these are shown on the slide under the support column. However, because the province has indicated the task force report will be used as a roadmap to guide future changes, we felt it's worthwhile to speak to some of the recommendations that planning staff have concern with. Generally, we do not agree with the idea of one-size-fits-all planning will work in every context. In fact, local development planning can be incredibly detailed and very technical, and is best left to the local governments to really analyze and figure out how that would work. We do not agree with the recommendations to change existing policy regulations that work to preserve neighborhood character, protect heritage, and facilitate good urban design. We feel there are value in these and that they are not mutually exclusive of affordable housing. For a complete analysis, I would encourage you to refer to the report that is included online. Now, let's take a look at the new bill that was introduced to implement the task force recommendations, Bill 109. The Planning Act is the significant focus of the bill, with proposals to change municipal planning approval process by introducing new timelines, financial penalties when the timelines are not met, new conditions for development applications, and more resources for the Ontario Land Tribunal, which is the provincial body that hears appeals on planning matters. There are also caps introduced on Parkland cash in lieu contribution. And there's a new tool called Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator, which enables local councils to consider new uses without going through the traditional planning application, much like a ministerial zoning order. So let's look at the visual of what the proposed cap on cash in lieu to Parkland might do. With new timelines and penalties, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. So what would these changes mean at face value? With the new timelines and penalties, the city would no longer be able to engage residents to the extent our normal practice, and will likely be limited to the single statutory meeting. Likewise, infill development is very complex and technical. The new penalties proposed in the Planning Act would make it very difficult to comprehensively review and address technical issues that really contribute to the safe, well-designed interface with public realm. With strict timelines, the city may be forced to expedite and hurry recommendations before fully vetting and addressing all the issues. And this may cause more applications to be directed to the Ontario Land Tribunal for decisions, which will not hurry the process and deliver housing faster. Development and building application process involves seeking the approval of many agencies and provincial and federal departments. In the absence of applying strict penalties and timelines on these agencies, municipalities will be hamstrung and could suffer financial loss and no control of their own. Simply put, Bill 109 will significantly impact the city's ability to acquire new parkland and to support the growth intended over the next 20 years. The Planning Act requires developers to dedicate parkland to the city. However, where adequate land cannot be dedicated, A developer would pay cash in lieu rate. These funds are used by the municipality to purchase land for parks to meet the needs of new residents. Recently, Council approved a parks plan which identifies parkland requirements to meet the needs of new residents. Bill 109 would drastically reduce the requirements for developers to contribute to land and/or pay cash in lieu rate in areas where there are major transit investments. Because in Mississauga, the majority of new residential units will be located in these areas, it will have a significant impact. While detailed regulations have yet to be released, staff have modeled a few development sites. One example of this is on the slide shown. Staff have also done some preliminary analysis, which shows that the impact to the city's funding for parkland provision could be impacted in the area of 600 million over the next 20 years. With a cap applied, achieving the city's parkland goals for growth would require an annual tax increase of an additional 5% to compensate for development not paying for public parkland. Tax increases of this magnitude would certainly impact housing affordability in our city. So in addition to the Planning Act changes, the province has shared plans to implement various initiatives that at first brush appear to be positive steps, and these are shown on the slide as follows. Mississauga Mayor and Council have been actively working to address the affordability crisis over the last several years. And since 2017, the city has been implementing our housing strategy. The strategy was developed in cooperation with a housing committee chaired by the mayor and 2 members of council and representatives from Build, local developers, builders, all levels of government, banking, school boards, and not-profit housing providers. And out of that process came 40 actions. One of the key themes of the housing strategy focused on removing barriers, as the mayor mentioned earlier, and this is what we've been actively working towards. One of the key pieces of work has been pre-zoning lands. This has been the focus in the downtown, the waterfront, and many other areas throughout the city. We've also leaned all of our planning and building processes to ensure we can meet the provincial requirement for population and employment growth, with many units approved and ready for development. We pride ourselves in meeting our legislative building review timelines with 95% compliance, which has led to almost $2.1 billion in construction value just this year. We also put considerable effort towards streamlining process and creating new incentive programs to facilitate more affordable housing. We are proud to say we have decreased overall processing times by 57% and have recently introduced a fast-track zoning application process. And just today, Council approved a new grant program that waives development charges for market and below market rental housing. Another key action of the housing strategy was to protect existing affordable rental. Council took the bold step in approving rental protection and demolition control bylaws. Over the last four years, we have been proactively negotiating contributions of affordable housing units in new condo projects, or we've accepted cash in lieu for these, and these funds have gone into a reserve that will be dedicated to supporting future affordable housing initiative projects. We also continue to work on other initiatives such as increasing housing options in our neighborhood and reducing parking standards. To conclude, I'd like to end my presentation on a few ideas that we feel would have significantly more impact than the amendments to the Planning Act the province is proposing, and these are shown on the slide. To reiterate, the proposed changes to the Planning Act will have significant impacts to parkland and the city's public realm. Staff do not believe these proposed changes to the Planning Act will result in the delivery of housing faster nor more affordable. If the province is serious about expediting development applications, the same disciplinary action proposed for municipalities should be applied to all decision makers in the process, including the province's own departments, developers, and their consultants. Ultimately, market conditions will dictate housing price, not planning process. We look forward to working actively with the province on the initiatives that can truly impact Mississauga's housing affordability. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And with that, we will move on to our question and answer session. We've received many questions so far over the course of this presentation. And if you would like to add a question, you can do so in the bottom right-hand corner of the WebEx screen. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can. I'd also like to recognize that Councillor Deepika Demirla from Ward 7 has joined the session as well. So our first question comes from Faraz. Why is council opposing intensification that would make housing more affordable and sustainable? Sprawl can't continue. Andrew?
Rob, would you mind repeating the question,
Absolutely, Andrew, not a problem at all. So why is council opposing intensification that would make housing more affordable and sustainable? Sprawl cannot continue.
Oh, thank you for the question. That's an excellent one. I would suggest the council is not opposing infill. In fact, our council championed a study that is called Housing Choices, and that is actually looking at ways in which council can consider throughout all the neighborhoods new ways to make room for various types of housing. So I would say that that is not necessarily the case, and council, in fact, Mississauga has focused on infill throughout all the neighborhoods for the last, at least since the last official plan, and directs a lot of growth to neighborhoods and to the abutting corridors within those areas. So.
I'd just like to jump in there too, if I could. So let me just rest assured to the resident that for us that we want intensification, but we want it where it makes sense. So certainly along the transit corridors, right in the downtown where we have unlimited height densities, in the newer communities that are mixed use and complete communities, and in the established neighborhoods and communities, we're all accepting gentle intensification. So those 1 or 2 lots are sold and suddenly you see townhomes or stacked townhomes or even garden suites or laneway suites, etc. And I think we were one of the first councils to embrace basement apartments and make them legal. So not at all. We are absolutely accepting intensification and densification, but let me add where it makes most sense for us. Thank you for the question. I don't know if any of the councillors want to jump in. If you do, raise your hand and we will acknowledge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our second question comes from Sharif. Not everyone wants to live in condos. What are you doing to encourage a housing mix in the city? Andrew?
Sorry, we're getting this. We're working out the kinks here. So yes, basically our official plan policy is what guides growth in our city, and our official plan policy is planning and anticipates a variety of housing choices for everyone that lives in Mississauga. So there are always areas where we've prioritized higher density versus lower density to facilitate that range of housing options in Mississauga. Of course, development is driven by a developer, and a developer chooses what it wants to build. But our official plan definitely facilitates a range of options. I should say that Mississauga, because a lot of it is built out, it is shifting its primary housing form to apartments because it's having to intensify and infill versus the greenfield development that it used to have the option to do.
I'd like to jump in there as well. So my biggest concern was some of the recommendations that the province is putting forward. By incentivizing supply, we don't necessarily get the right product. Of course, the development community want to build condominiums because they're lucrative. And, if we approve lots of condominiums, we will meet the supply that the province is asking us. But that doesn't meet our objectives of different formats of housing that's appropriate for families, or housing that is affordable for families and middle income people. So I think we're a little bit at the tension here exists in whether your goal is to incentivize supply, get product out the market, or whether, as we chose to do, ensuring that the supply of housing that comes to the market is appropriate and affordable. So appropriate for families and at the right price to make it affordable for the middle class. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Madam Mayor. Our next question comes from Noka. Outside of the recommendations, what can the province do to support the city's efforts in tackling the housing crisis?
Thank you for the question. So that last slide really speaks to some of the things that we would like the province to consider. One thing I would particularly point out is the idea of inclusionary zoning, which is a tool that the Planning Act now allows cities to require a portion of affordable housing in all new developments. And at one point, inclusionary zoning was applied throughout the entire city. And then there was a change made where it was reduced to apply only to areas where there are major transit or high order transit, such as a LRT or a BRT, those type of places. One thing I believe the province could do to help with affordability is to actually broaden the ability to apply inclusionary zoning throughout the entire city and not just in those areas of transit.
Raise your hand here means literally raise my hand. I just want to comment on this as well. So right now we're only permitted to use inclusionary zoning in transit zones, but we'd like to apply it all over the city where it makes sense. I think the greatest answer to your question, Noka, is that we want to work in collaboration. We want to solve the housing affordability crisis along with other levels of government. We all have a role here. This isn't solely the responsibility of the cities. We could never do it alone. We need the provincial government to come to the table to work with us and the federal government to help incentivize some of the some of the measures, the tools that can be put in place. But we also need the other stakeholder groups to come to the table, such as the development community itself and financial institutions. Everyone has a role to play. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. So we just want greater collaboration at all three levels of government to work together just to solve these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Munawaral. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sato, you had your hand up. My apologies. Go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you, Rob. I wanted to respond to that one because that's something that's very near and dear to me. One of the things that the province should be doing and refuses is to allow us to require a percentage of all housing that is being approved by council to be affordable housing. And invariably, when I always ask for 25%, which is what we had back in the 1990s. So the housing that was built then, whether it was high density or single family, there was a requirement that 25% of the housing had to be affordable to buy or rent. And that was dropped. Huge mistake. We've been asking for that right for years, and the province and various governments at the province have refused to allow us. So the developers come back and say, well, no, we're not going to give 25%. And we end up negotiating down to 10 or maybe if we're lucky 15%. But the province is not backing us up on that. So if we got that from the province, 25% minimum affordable housing in every single development application, then we would be able to provide the affordable housing. And that's a simple thing that we need the province to do. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll just keep asking for it.
Councillor Sato, that's excellent input. Of course, inclusionary zoning, other cities have used it quite successfully. And as a council, we can come to agreement on what that magic number is that's appropriate for Mississauga. With respect to the task force being the report, their report being the roadmap for the provincial government for the future, I will say that at a minimum, I think that municipalities should have had a seat at that table. We weren't invited to participate on the task force, so the task force didn't hear our perspective or get our input on how we think we could contribute, and also didn't hear from us directly on what the unintended consequences are of some of their recommendations. So I thought that was a big oversight, and I hope that in the future, should the task force come together once again, that other stakeholders will be invited, but particularly representatives from municipal governments, to provide our perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Munawar Al. Aside from affordability, what are the plans for accommodating an aging population? Andrew?
Thanks for the question. So for an aging population, we are looking at various ways, especially around affordability, to explore options for home sharing, those type of issues that seniors often face. We are also looking at ways in which the aging population or seniors can move easily from their homes and transition into other smaller homes if they choose to, and that's partly why we provide a level of housing options in every community, because we are trying to create a mix of housing so that people can move through housing in a way that suits their generation. I will say one of the key findings of our affordable housing strategy initially was that a lot of the single family dwellings in Mississauga are occupied by one or two people. And so that is part of the challenge that we are facing, because we can't create new single family dwellings necessarily. So one of the options, again, is to try to create that variety of housing in those neighborhoods to encourage people that may be overhoused in some instances to look for alternatives.
I'd just like to add too, Andrew, that, you know, we do apply that lens. We get so many applications for seniors housing, long-term care, et cetera. And this is a huge issue with an aging population that every municipality has to tackle. What Andrew's saying is very true. People are overhoused in Mississauga, particularly once they're empty nesters. There's only two people residing in a large home, or sometimes one. And we have to create appropriate housing for seniors. And often that's not townhomes, because I have an 86-year-old mother. Many of you are familiar with my mom, Veronica, who, you know, has mobility issues and she can't climb stairs, so townhouses aren't for her. So we have to apply that lens. This is appropriate for seniors as our population ages. So great questions. Thank you. I don't know if any of the councillors, Councillor DeMerla has her hand up. Why don't we go over to her?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I just wanted to say that on the seniors housing, there is an innovative pilot that is taking place in the region of Peel right now. It sort of addresses what Andrew spoke about, which is often seniors can be overhoused because it could be one or two people living in a large house. And so there's this really great program that I just wanted to let everyone know about. It's called Peel Home Share. And what it does is it pairs up a senior who may be living on their own and is doing just fine, but maybe finding that some of the chores are a little too hard to do, putting the garbage out, cutting the grass, shoveling the snow, but they still want to live in their own home. So they pair such seniors up with students for reduced rent. So the student stays with the senior, provides companionship and of course support, and will do some light chores in exchange for reduced rent. It solves two problems. It sort of helps students find affordable housing. It lets seniors continue to live on their own, and you know, somewhat addresses the overhousing issue as well. So if anyone is interested in learning more about it, just Google peelhomeshare.ca. It's a pilot that is taking place as we speak, and I know staff is looking at matching people. So please do explore that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next question comes from Julian. What is the city doing to streamline development applications? Andrew?
Thanks for the question, Julian. So The city has been doing a tremendous amount of work on the area of streamlining. In fact, we have been early adopters of a program called Lean. And so most of our development application processes, our building planning approval processes have gone through those. And out of that work, we've saved approximately 11,000 hours on processing time. We've also been leaders in delegating authority to me, in fact, to approve certain components of planning act, the planning applications to expedite the completion of those. So one of the things, as example, in Bill 109, it suggests that we need to delegate the authority for site plan approval to the commissioner or equivalent. So the city of Mississauga has actually done that for several years. And so that has allowed us to hurry up the approval of applications. And council just recently, I think it was 2 weeks ago, approved a new rezoning application process that would significantly reduce time in terms of the approval process. So those are just a few of the steps we take. Continuous improvement is a real driving force in the planning and building department, and it's something that we pride ourselves quite a bit on.
Just wanted to jump in here as well, Julian, if I can. And the good news is that we process 95% of our development applications in the time allotted that we're targeting. And on average, it takes 18 months. Now, of course, if you're planning a rezoning, that can take longer. And there are legislative requirements for community consultation, but also comments from each different department. And some of those departments are provincial. They could be Ministry of Transportation, they could be Ministry of the Environment. So we all have to work together. Obviously the processes can be improved, both at the city, the province, and we all need to work together to ensure that we get the comments back quickly. So, as not to create bottlenecks, but we're always working towards improving our processes. And I know that the provincial government is as well. We don't want to, we want to get product to market. But as I said earlier, we want to get the right product to market. But if a development community wants to come and build residential land in commercial areas or in industrial areas, well, that's a lot tougher and that takes a little longer. So sometimes we do run into that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Priya. What is the city doing or working towards to change zoning to support more housing? Andrew, do you want to lead off on that one?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, Priya. So as I mentioned earlier, through the official plan review process, we've embarked upon a study called Housing Options. And essentially what that study is doing is to really explore Mississauga's existing zoning regime and asking ourselves where and how and what would fit in the various communities to allow for additional housing types, duplexes, laneway houses, gateway houses, granny flats, maybe duplexes, triplexes. All of those options are currently under study. It's an interesting study because Mississauga is unique. We're different from Toronto. We have a different built form than Toronto. So when we study and look at infill, we have to contemplate and consider what the suburban context might look like in those cases. How do we accommodate parking, as example? Where in Toronto, many of the neighborhoods have very good access to transit. Some of the neighborhoods in Mississauga do not have good transit. So we would have to look at how we can accommodate cars and other things. It's something that we're committed to, but it is a lot more challenging, I believe, in a suburban context that we're trying to urbanize. And that I'll end.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Going to our next question comes from Brennan. With the upcoming provincial election, what are other parties proposing to address housing? And perhaps I'll turn this over to Madam Mayor to start.
Thank you for the question, Brennan. And well, I would I would agree. We do have a provincial election coming up in June, and another municipal election in the fall. And I would ask you to evaluate what each party is willing to do to incentivize the building of affordable housing and family housing in Ontario. So I ask the right questions. Please attend the community meetings and review those policy platforms. That I'm not going to open it up to provincial candidates on this call. This is our call to provide our feedback on our processes. But please attend those candidate meetings out in the community and ask them what their plans are for their parties, what they will be doing to incentivize the building of more affordability in Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our next question comes from Jacqueline. How do you avoid excess neighborhood opposition, sometimes called Nimbyism, that prevents affordable housing? Andrew, perhaps we'll start with you.
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure. We're in the business of avoiding NIMBYism. We believe that everyone has the right to fully participate in any planning process. But I will say, in the city of Mississauga, our approach to engagement, and specifically around development, has generally been quite positive. The outcomes tend to be a better product because the developer and the community are working together to solve those problems. Sometimes the problems are very small and easy for the developer to fix. So from our perspective, there will always be people that object. The Planning Act, the very focus of the Planning Act is about managing change. It's not to stop change, it's about how we manage it. And I think through the planning processes and the work we do with the community, we really do a pretty good job at managing the process.
It's a tough question, and it's one we struggle with too, because of course nobody likes change. People bought their home in their neighborhood because they love the city, they love their neighborhood, and they don't want to see it change. But the reality is it has to. And we do have to intensify, and we do have to build more housing. So it is something that we grapple with as a council. I don't know if any of my councillors want to comment on this. I understand people are proud of their communities and their homes, but change is difficult to embrace and to adapt it sometimes. But those comments can lead to better developments. So they're very important as well. And certainly I will say that, we do build many of our new development communities through the vision of our resident groups and the residents that live in the neighboring communities. And their input is vital because we are designing and zoning their homes and their neighborhoods and their communities. So I think that input is very important. I see that Councillor Dasko has his hand up, Mr. Moderator, so we'll go over to him.
I thank you, Madam Mayor, and some very good points that are being brought up, and I think one of them for sure, NIMBYism, I think sometimes gets taken out of context as well, because, for example, in Lakeview itself, it was residents that really drove and initiated having some intensification down in Lakeview, and that was the site of the old power plant, of course, and also looking at the Brightwater area down in Port Credit. So, but that all being said, it's when that's put out, sometimes I think what happens too, and it gets twisted a little bit, is certain parameters are given and then they're pushed a little bit further out. So I think everything within moderation, but also people should know that what they're buying is what they're buying. So I think having intensification and density going in prescribed areas, but letting people know well in advance what that looks like.
Thank you, Councillor Dasko. Are there any other councillors who'd like to comment before we move to the next question? Councillor Mullen.
Sorry about that. I think it comes back then to public consultation. I think there's nothing wrong with people voicing their concerns about a development in their community, but public consultation is extremely important, and working with the developer is important. And hopefully at the end of the day, you'll get something that maybe is toned down and something that's better in the long run. And maybe it's appropriate for the commissioner to speak to the whole issue of the public consultation and the fact that the timelines will really put a strain on that ability of councillors to be able to go out into their communities, and also what that time frame means in terms of additional money that will be put onto the taxpayer, because we will be paying that money back if the timelines are not met. So I think it's important to speak to that public consultation, which actually makes a development in the end better. But I think it's important to talk about the timelines and what that will actually mean if we don't meet those timelines and we don't have the ability to go out and consult.
Andrew wanted to add some comments here as well.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Mullen, for giving me the opportunity to speak to those. So, yes, basically, under the proposed changes to the Planning Act through Bill 109, it really creates a difficult time for the city to go beyond what is statutorily required, which is one public meeting. Traditionally, with development applications or planning processes in the city, councillors have tend to work with the developer and engage residents around various projects to hear their comments. And through that process, we're able to address a lot of the issues that might otherwise come up at that statutory process. So in fact, in some instances, it really actually benefits the process. So with the elimination of that community consultation, we do worry a little bit that we are not going to be able to understand all the issues in advance, hear all the issues, work through all the issues. And so we might end up actually driving a lot more of the development applications to the Ontario Land Tribunal for resolution. And that really is not the way we would like to do planning in Mississauga, because that really is taking the decision-making out of our council hands and putting it in the tribunal hands. So I do agree, Councillor Mullen, that these changes can really impact how we work here in the city. And generally, we've created a pretty good development and planning environment that is working. So I do worry about those, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to those.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, councillors. Our next question comes from Katia. Does infill include multiplexes or just townhomes? A 4-story multiplex might not be much larger than many new single dwellings in our residential neighborhoods. Andrew, do you want to take the first crack at that?
So infill can include all kinds of housing. It can include a single family, it can include dwellings, townhouses, everything. Council would consider anything. What I think a lot of the confusion around infill is about what is something that's called as of right, which means you don't have to go and change planning permissions to do it. And that's exactly what we're studying through our housing options report. We're looking at different types of housing that can go into areas without a planning application process. And so that's something that will come to council in the next year through the official planning process.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Going to our next question, it comes to us from Benji. What about deeply affordable housing, more deeply affordable housing? Much of what we're discussing tonight relates to the missing middle, but what about affordable housing that is more deeply affordable? Andrew?
Thanks for the question. This is really important. And as I mentioned earlier today, council approved a new grant program that would waive DCs for those more deeply affordable housing programs, below market rental housing. So that is just one step that we've done to really address that deeply affordable housing component. Another thing that the mayor mentioned at the outset of our meeting was the rental protection bylaw. A lot of the areas that we are protecting are in fact affordable rental that exists and that we do not want to lose. So that's another major initiative that the city of Mississauga has implemented. And then, of course, our council is part of the region where there is a lot of initiatives that address and work towards the deeply affordable housing component. So, Madam Mayor, you may want to speak to some of that.
Yeah, so at the Region of Peel, of course, they undertake our subsidized housing program as well. We are trying to bring down our numbers on the waiting list, and our approach has been to purchase units and place our families, into those units. There are also religious organizations that have come forward, and we have waived their development charges, which have built affordable units. I know that I live very proximate to a new development on Lakeshore myself. I don't know if any of the councillors who have a lot of familiarity with the programs available at the region want to come in. Councillor Sato or Councillor Parrish, maybe. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hands, but the fact remains that the Region of Peel, they undertake our subsidized housing program, and there are a number of programs available there. And if you're interested, please send us an email. You can send it to me if you like, mayor@mississauga.ca, and we'll get more information for you from the region.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Andrew. Our next question comes from Demian. Sorry, Councillor Fonseca, it's a big screen. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you, Rob. And just to piggyback onto what Mayor Crombie was saying, with regards to the Region of Peel, we have passed a 10-year plan, a housing plan, looking at a strategy to look at the infrastructure that is in place for deep affordable housing units. And I don't have I was trying to pull up the actual link to this plan. I'm happy to do so and perhaps pass it on to you, Rob. But that would be an excellent document for anyone looking and that has questions about deep affordability to look at. And then from there, if they have follow-up questions, send them through that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fonseca. Moving on to the next question. This one is from Demian and perhaps is best directed to the mayor. Are you collaborating with any other GTA municipalities to advance more affordable housing?
You know, it's an excellent question, and I will say that yes, the mayors of the GTHA collaborate frequently. In fact, throughout COVID and even up till today, we continue to meet. It used to be weekly, and now it's bi-weekly, and we exchange ideas on a number of issues, initially COVID related, but housing has now taken up a lot of our agendas. In addition, I'm a member and actually vice chair of the Ontario Big City Mayors, and I know that Michelle Baker is on our call, and she is the director of the Ontario Big City Mayors, and we too have an agenda that looks very closely at all legislation, and particularly we collaborate and we discuss ideas and we discuss what's being done in each of our municipalities that's innovative or new or changes that are being made. So yes, there are a number of initiatives both in the GTHA and throughout the province of Ontario. And then I will say, I'm also a member of Canada's Big City Mayors, and we do meet, and housing is often on our agenda. And we work with the federal government and the Minister of Housing, particularly in the recent rapid housing initiative that has been put forward. And they are giving us grants to get product out of the market. So there is a lot of collaboration ongoing at the different levels. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our next question comes from Rafid. How does Bill 109 impact parkland provision? How can the city provide extra parkland in our neighborhoods? And perhaps I'll direct this to our Commissioner of Community Services, Jody Robolos. Jody?
Thank you, Rob, and thanks very much for the question. This is in the context of everything that's in phase one of this, of the changes. I think, you know, we tend to see the housing affordability issue, But, you know, creating Parkland and our ability to deliver Parkland for future residents will be significantly impacted by Bill 109. One of the questions that I've asked myself multiple times over the last several weeks is what kind of communities do we want to create for future residents? We can create a lot of housing options and a lot of housing choices, but unless that comes with great public space, trees, and ability for people to connect through our communities, you know, I don't think that we're doing our future residents any service. So what Bill 109 does is it, residents may have seen over the last several weeks, we've brought a parks plan to council, which identifies how many parks and what acreage of parkland that we need to support future growth in the city. And we have a plan to get there up until the point that we receive some information on Bill 109. So our plan is to still acquire parkland. The challenge will be, how do we do that? What Bill 109 does is it significantly reduces the obligation on developers to provide parkland, which has always been the case as part of the Planning Act. Development should pay for development, and in particular, providing parkland has always been an obligation that we've worked with developers on. In our transit-oriented communities, which has quite a broad definition to include things like higher density mixed-use development that is connected to or within a short walk of transit or stops. What it does is it really significantly reduces the developer's obligation to contribute parkland, regardless of how many units are on a site. So previously, our cash in lieu rate was on a per unit basis. It's now really looking on a per land mass basis. And what that does, particularly challenging in our higher density areas, is, you know, makes it more difficult for the city to acquire that parkland without some significant investment beyond the development community. So very upsetting, I think, in terms of where we are wanting to go. How we get there is going to be significantly challenged. And I would ask the residents who are listening today to really think about what kind of community they want to live in and what kind of community they want future residents to live in, because this will be significant for parkland acquisition.
Thank you very much, Jody. Madam Mayor?
Yeah, and Jody, you make an excellent point. And, you know, when I think about proposals, even in the downtown, and Councillor DeMerle or Councillor Kovac may want to comment as well. But, you know, we have developers will buy a piece of property and they'll want to put 5 towers or 4 towers on instead of 2 or 3, and they'd rather give us the money and say, we're going to give you cash in lieu of the parkland we need to provide so we can get that extra tower in. And we're saying, but we need that green space. We need parkland in our city, and the money you give us, you know, may not enable us to purchase parkland in the downtown for the same rate once it becomes available. So it's a bit of a conundrum for us. This new formula has posed a bit of a conundrum, particularly in our downtown core.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor DeMerle, did you want to weigh in?
Sure, thank you for the opportunity. And I think the mayor captured it well. You know, the challenge with the cash in lieu is the cash comes in, but then where is the land to buy? Because if you're building every square centimeter downtown, then the only place you can buy parks with that money is far away from downtown, which is not fair to the downtown residents, because you want the green space to be space that you can walk to with your kids, not a place that you have to get into a car to go to, because that defeats the purpose. So certainly I'm a big proponent of, if I'm intensifying in the downtown, then the green space has to be in the downtown. And how we make that happen, you know, if you have the political will, we can make that happen. But certainly the changes that are being proposed obviously make it that much harder. And the other challenge is, even if you get the money and even if you find the land, there's the price of the land. I mean, the price of the land is so exorbitant downtown, then that's the other issue, is how do you afford to pay for it? And it gets tempting because you may be able to buy 10 acres at the edges of the city and only buy 1 acre in downtown. And so then those issues and opportunities start to weigh with each other, and often the downtown can get shortchanged for green space. So this is definitely a very difficult issue, and the proposed changes have made it that much more challenging. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeMerle. Our next question, I'm actually going to combine 2 of them together, one from Kavita and the other one from Kazia. The first is, how would you discourage investor-owned residential properties? And combined with that, can the city control rules around investors purchasing multiple properties or purchasing units for short-term rentals? Andrew, perhaps I'll send it to you first.
Thank you for the question, Rob. Well, I think the short answer in the very beginning is no, the city can't control that. That actually is a provincial issue. And I believe that some of the legislation or the initiatives that are proposed by the province actually are trying to address a lot of these issues. So those are some of the things that I identified as positive moves on the provincial side.
Thank you, Andrew. Moving on to our next question. This one comes from Jacqueline. Have you thought of other creative ways to build housing, such as condos in low traffic malls? I believe we've done reimagining the mall. So Andrew, I'll send it back to you.
We have, I think, and that's Councillor Parrish's favorite project, I believe. Councillor Sato. So reimagining the mall was a project that we initiated around major malls within the city of Mississauga, and really essentially did exactly what you were asking. Is we looked at how these malls might change and transform over the future. And really what we were trying to do is make these malls more diverse by providing certain levels of housing opportunities, by providing more walkable communities, more green space, generally more livable spaces. But doing that while we're also keeping some of the key amenities that the malls offer, because what happens sometimes is when you have a redevelopment of a commercial site, you lose very valuable commercial services that the community relies upon.
Thank you, Andrew. I will go to Councillors Parrish and Carlson, then Mahoney, and then Councillor Sato. Councillor Parrish and Carlson, go ahead.
Yes, I'm in the process of actually battling with Andrew over a Heartland proposal, which is just the bottom two sections of Heartland that all the stores are dying. And they want to put residential in there with a park through the middle of it. And our staff keeps telling us, and the regional staff mostly say, well, you know, that's zoned commercial, so you can't do that. And if empty stores do not get purchasers for the stores that do have employees in them. And we need residents to keep those stores alive. And sometimes the planners are wrong, not ours, the ones at the region. And I'm going to battle for Heartland because the plan I saw is gorgeous. It's affordable, it's low rise, and it's got a massive park through the middle of it, so we don't need to buy any parkland. And if you go south of Matheson, you realize there's not a lot of big parks in the lower part of, or that part of Ward 5. So I agree that plazas are dying, and so do the owners. They know that they're in trouble. Amazon's flipping things on people's doorsteps on a daily basis. It's a very convenient way to shop. And I'm going to battle for the reimagining of the mall, Andrew.
Over to Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you very much for the question. I think it's very important. I know Councillor Sato, she's on the board as well here, but we have a couple of malls that have gone through the process of reimagining, and we had a number of public consultations that were very well attended. And I think the idea was to get ahead of the planning process and get public input, because as these malls begin to die, it's a massive footprint, and we want to make sure that we get community input early and put policies in place to be able to put the right things on there. I think Councillor Parrish put it, and so did Andrew. We really want to create walkable, livable communities that you can do a combination of residential, retail, gyms, cafes, restaurants, all of those types of things. And for any residents who want to drive through beautiful Ward 8, the old Sheridan Mall, you can see some of the revitalization that's happening right now. So they want to keep the actual footprint of the mall, and then over a long period of time with further public consultation, look at redeveloping that. So I think our planning staff have done a great job, and we've also done a great job of engaging the community on these projects, so we ensure we get their input going forward, because I think we need to, again, get ahead of that, and they can be very exciting projects as we move forward. So I think it's a great question, and I'm excited to see how those developments come forward.
Thank you, Councillor Mahoney. I'll go to Councillor Sato and then Councillor Fonseca.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you know, the reimagining the mall, I was fortunate. I had two major malls that were part of the project, Erin Mills Town Center and Meadowvale Town Center. And I think this is an example of where we need to encourage the province to keep the consultation process in place. Hundreds of residents came out to the meetings that we held on both of those malls, and the input was absolutely invaluable. And what we ended up with were new policies that determined the malls being redeveloped to include residential. So someone asked earlier about rezoning land. Well, that land is going to be rezoned. So it's going from commercial land, commercial and retail and office, to a mix of residential, commercial, retail, and office, which is what we want to achieve. And we have opportunities there to provide seniors housing, to provide more affordable housing. If we get the percentage that that I mentioned earlier, that from the province, if they allow us to require that. But I wanted to also, because I was skimming down through the questions, and I see that Martin asked the same question about reimagining the mall, but he also asked about the Meadowvale Character Area Study. So we went beyond that. And as part of the Meadowvale Character Area Study, we have determined what the development and the infill and the intensification will be in my community of Meadowvale for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And part of that was looking at the small plazas, not malls, but small plazas in Meadowvale that could be reimagined and redeveloped into a mix of housing and retail. And that is part of the policies that we approved just last year, late last year at council. So, you know, we are moving forward on these projects, and we're doing it in Ward 9. We're doing the two malls. We've done the entire community of Meadowvale. And that was all done with hundreds and hundreds of residents contributing their ideas. And I have to say, at the end of the day, the support from the community, because that's how infill, that's how intensification, that's how densification should be done. And the community embraced it because they had a say and they played a role in it. So it is happening. I'm very excited about it, and I look forward to seeing it take shape over the next years.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sato, and over to Councillor Fonseca.
Thank you very much, Rob. And I was going to say exactly what Councillor Sato just said, and also Mahoney, with regards to the importance of emphasizing to the MPPs the public consultation process through the reimagining the mall process. The mall that was reimagined or in the process in Ward 3 is Rockwood Mall. And echoing what the other councillors have said about this process, I too had hundreds of people attend multiple public engagement sessions, workshops where the public was able to first walk through. We actually did walkabouts of the entire community on the mall site, but also in the area. And there were 20 people that would go out per walkabout, and included in the 20 people that did the walkabout were seniors, those with accessibility needs, those that are in affordable housing within Queen Frederica, Riley Court, and Twin Pines. Actually, representatives from the mall did the walkabout with us. Rental residents were invited through Dixie Bloor Neighborhood Center, also newcomers to the community, and also single family homeowners in Rockwood, in the Rockwood and Fleetwood neighborhoods, because Rockwood Mall is in Rockwood. They were invited, and it was just really an incredible public engagement that was physically happening, and at the same time, then following that, workshops. So just to emphasize, those that have written down, how can we best, what message can we best give to the MPPs? Definitely the public consultation process when it comes to planning and developing complete communities for now and for the future. That public consultation, those public consultation sessions are invaluable. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Moving on to the next question. This one comes to us from Angelo. Should the city look to the future instead of preserving character? Why should character and heritage be prioritized over people that need housing now? Perhaps I'll direct that to both Andrew and to Jody Robolos.
Thanks so much for the question. I mean, basically, I would start with, as chief planner, I would say that all great cities actually do both. And I would contend that the city of Mississauga can meet its housing needs and meet affordability housing needs while also protecting its very important heritage areas by developing a fantastic urban realm. These things do not exist exclusive of each other. We can make it work together, and we have for many years. So I'll pass it over to Jody to answer the other portion of the question.
Thank you, Andrew, and agree 100% with what you said. We've seen some really great examples of working with developers who maintain heritage facilities and integrate those facilities within development. And I think that's great to see. And Mississauga is a city of villages. And, you know, what we love a lot of times about the city of Mississauga is the uniqueness of our villages and our heritage districts. And again, those ideas are not mutually exclusive, and affordability doesn't come at the expense of, you know, removing all heritage and history from the city. So it's definitely, from a heritage perspective, something that we support integration of.
Thank you very much, Jody. Moving on, the next question comes to us from Monica. How can the city encourage moderate intensification? There seems to be a focus on tall buildings or single detached homes. Perhaps, Andrew, you could start with this.
Well, this is a question that I would suggest our council asks every day, and it's something that city planning staff actively work towards resolving. But certainly, just at a high level, our official plan creates a hierarchy. And so the tallest buildings are directed to the downtown, and then lower buildings are directed more towards the community nodes, and then even smaller buildings necessarily to perhaps our neighborhoods. So a lot of housing, though, as I mentioned earlier, the way the process works is a developer comes in with an application, and those applications tend to go beyond and ask for additional height beyond what the official plan says. So we would love to see a little bit more mid-rise development, and some communities are getting that and some communities are not. But I see there's several hands up to speak, so I will end there.
Thank you, Andrew. I will go to Councillor Dasco and then to Councillor DeMarla. Councillor Dasco.
Thanks, Rob. I think some really good points. And I must say, a lot of the work that's gone into this, and I do believe that this housing task force that was put out really upends a lot of what I think is some really good work that is done at the city that is really on the ground. So when it comes to the official plan, local area plans right across the city, in terms of where density should go and might want to go. All of these things are well factored out, and it's not, sometimes these reports look like this is something that that municipalities haven't done or are not keen on doing it. And again, reimagining them all is a significant step in that direction. What was done at the downtown core, for example, Lakeview, master plan complete community, also in that regard. But what I will say is, if there are areas that are, single family detached existing homes, people need to have some certainty on what they bought into. And so essentially what I'm saying really is, if we have a plan, and we do have plans in place, that we should be sticking to them. And if we are looking to reimagine or add some gentle density, the underlying term is gentle density, and not just the sky's the limit, which is unfortunately what we're seeing a lot of right now, because we want to add on to and enhance our communities, not destroy them. And Parkland, to what Commissioner Robolos was mentioning earlier, is at the heart of a lot of our communities. And you can tell when we don't have enough of it, what happens, and we all scramble to try to find out how we can get some parkland. So, some great questions here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And over to Councillor DeMerla.
Thank you, Rob. And this is an issue that's really close to my heart, the idea of a more moderate intensification. And I've said this before, and I'll say this, is that I do wonder if, we've just, the pendulum swung, from urban sprawl to what I call vertical sprawl. And the assumption is that urban sprawl has to be replaced now by vertical sprawl. But the problem is any extremes brings with it problems. And I'm under no illusion that vertical sprawl has its own challenges. And one of the biggest challenges, of course, is that as human beings, we want to build communities. We don't want to just house people. We want to give people homes, a sense of belonging. And for that, you have to build human scale. That's just how we are wired. And so you have to build something that's human scale. And so when you just build skyscraper after skyscraper after skyscraper, you may get intensification, you may house people, but you're not building communities. You're not building walkable places where people feel comfortable, where people want to go and shop and browse and have coffee and just feel that human scale. And so how do you hit that sweet spot? How do you build communities? How do you build homes? And not just the idea of somehow we need to house people. We need to go beyond housing people to how do we build strong communities? How do we create that village feel? And we really have to start thinking in those terms. And that's why I think that's where vertical sprawl, I think, just loses the plot. It just doesn't do that. It's almost this mechanical, soulless machine of just somehow scrambling to house people. And that's disappointing. We really need to figure out how do we build more human scale. Yes, we need to intensify. Yes, we need to use land more properly. Yes, urban sprawl has its problems. We recognize that, and we're trying to correct that. But let's just not go all the way to the other side and just say the only solution now is vertical sprawl. So whoever asked that question, great question. I think there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle, medium height. I'd love to see more of that, and certainly something I'd like to see in Cooksville, where I'm trying to push for a 15-minute walkable community. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to something that I'm quite passionate about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeMerla. We can hear your passion. Our next question comes to us from Bilal. How do you explain Mississauga losing population in the last census? And I'll turn it over to Andrew, but perhaps also Jason Bevan, our Director of City Planning Strategies.
Thanks for this question. Basically, the census looks at the population, obviously, but what it doesn't really consider, and when you look at this in more detail, we begin to understand that in fact, we actually had increase in population in the areas we were planning to direct our growth. So in many of the intensification areas we just talked to, but where the decrease is most notable are in those neighborhoods where many of the dwellings are occupied by one or two household members. So that's those areas where we are currently undertaking some study to look at additional options in those communities to allow for more population to go to those. I don't know, Jason, if you'd like to speak any further on those the facets of the census.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. Just to add a few points, we often see that municipalities without greenfield land or farmland that is being developed tend to have slower growth rates than cities like Brampton or East Gwillimbury and those type of municipalities that have greenfield land with a lot of new low density development created. We also note that the 2021 census also had some COVID related impacts, such as reduced immigration, less students entering the city than would typically occur. So we think that some of these effects are more short term, and also looking at our building permits being issued over the last couple of years have really been at historic highs. So we do expect a lot more housing completions to come on stream over the next couple of years, which will likely lead to population increases. I would note too that it really was a very small decline between 2016 and 2021. So it's essentially a flat population, but we do expect it to increase over the next few years.
Thank you, Jason and Andrew. Madam Mayor, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just quickly. So just what Jason said, it was really just about 3,000 people. And a lot of that was COVID related. Many people were making choices to move more remote communities, smaller communities, cash out, of course, and had the opportunity to work remotely. So I think that accounted for it. Those 3,000 that we dropped, and unfortunately Winnipeg actually grew by a few, and we dropped into 7th largest city rather from 6th. But we're going to come back because we've issued $2 billion worth of permits last year, and we're on track to do that or more this year. So we are filling the demand for supply, and I know we will grow, and we will grow once again. I think we're going over to Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're coming close to the end here. I have one more question, and then I will turn it over to Andrew because I believe he has some rapid fire answers he wants to give to some outstanding questions. So I think I'll direct this question to the mayor, and perhaps either Councillor Fonseca or any of the councillors want to respond to this. But how is the city planning to engage with Mironet and the ratepayers associations in Mississauga on this matter? And this question comes from Applewood Hills and Heights Ratepayer Association.
You know, Athena, thank you. It is a great question. And, you know, this is an attempt to engage with people. It is very difficult for us. This is a very expensive session to put on, but we thought it was so important. We wanted people to learn more about the changes that were being proposed. And it's so important that you reach out to your provincial government and inform them on how you feel about these proposed changes. And in the provincial election, when it's June 2nd, be sure resident groups like Mironet and like the Applewood Hills Heights Residents Association host debates and engage with candidates and look at the platforms of all the parties and ask them if they were supporting these types of changes that will really impact the nature and character and community of their neighborhoods. But at the same time, you know, are their proposals, will they bring on stream affordability? You know, it's one thing to build condos, but condos, whereas they used to be 1,200 square feet are now 700 and 500 square feet. That's completely not appropriate for families. So this is our council's attempt to reach a broad audience right across the city. We've got everyone here tonight to answer your questions. I'm sure our council would be happy to do another session should there be more proposed changes in our council chamber. I know that the councillors are willing to attend the resident association meetings to speak to these issues. I see them all nodding. So it's not only, you know, your group, Athena, but right across the city, the councillors are equally, equipped to speak to our perspective on adding affordability to the supply of housing. But you know, it's very difficult to get the message across, and I know we will also give them content for their printed and electronic newsletters. I hope that helps. I see Councillor Mullen has, and Councillor Fonseca, we'll go to Councillor Fonseca, then Councillor Mullen has her hand up, and I know that Andrew has a bunch of rapid responses to some questions that were posed in the box below that he'd like to get to as well. So if we could keep our answers brief. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Athena, for the question. I echo what the mayor has said with regards to absolutely if attending a AGM and or board meetings of residents associations to provide more input, more to answer questions. I myself have provided a planning 101, and thank you to Andrew, Jason, Bevan, and a number, Chris Rouse, and a number of others that participated on that panel. Through to the Ward 3 community. And I know that other councillors have done the same. Councillor Dasco, I believe. I know also, Athena, that Applewood Hills and Heights Residents Association collaborated with Rockwood Homeowners Association, requesting that city staff and myself attend a session on the infill. So absolutely, any way, shape, or form we can support the residents associations, or to have another citywide meeting. I'm open to that. And I just will echo what the mayor was saying with regards to, it's really important that all residents associations also ask these questions to the MPPs, not only leading into this election, but moving forward with regards to public consultation and engagement around planning and development and making complete communities. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Rob.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fonseca. I will go to Councillor Mullen, then to Councillor Dasco, and then back to Andrew, and then we'll proceed to concluding remarks. Councillor Mullen, go ahead. I think you're muted, Councillor Mullen.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I think I would only echo Councillor Fonseca's remarks, but I think Jody said it very well. What kind of community do you want? Do you want a community with less consultation? Do you want a community with less parkland? Do you want a quicker rezoning, which will actually financially, they will penalize us at the end, and that will end up being on the backs of the taxpayers. So I think the question is, what kind of a community do you want? Get informed. If you have questions following this meeting, there's all kinds of links that you can go to get the information. Planning is very, very complicated. I have to say, I've only came back on council the last couple of months, but I am so impressed with what this council has done in terms of trying to deal with housing and the struggles that you have in terms of applications that can come forward that don't meet the official plan, the struggles to try to have an intensification, but yet a gentle intensification. It's a challenge, and we're not the final decision makers, and that's where people don't understand that we can go through all the public consultation, we can come up with the best plan, and then the Ontario Municipal Board, which isn't, I think it's OLD now, whatever the terminology is, we are not the final decision makers, and that is what is so frustrating to the residents. So, you know, what kind of a community we want? I think that this council has done an amazing job in terms of looking at all kinds of creative approaches. And quite frankly, we shouldn't just be trying to do this alone. We have a federal and provincial government that need to be part of the whole housing scenario, especially when it comes to affordability. I'm not even sure how you define affordability, quite frankly. There's affordability for those at the middle level, and then there's those that really need subsidized housing. So it's very complicated, but right now it's very important to have your say, to contact your MPP. I'm very concerned about the future and where we're going with the province pretty well taking over planning. So get informed, but I can only compliment, for the very short time I've been back on council, what this council is doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mullen. And last word, Councillor Dasco.
Thank you, Rob. I just wanted to reach out, first of all, to Matthew, who's got some questions with regards to gentle density. Please feel free to reach out to my office, which is Stephen, STEPHEN.Dasco, DASKO, at mississauga.ca. And I'll be happy to connect with you, and we can have a further conversation on that. Some great comments there. And one of the other items too that I'd like to mention, and perhaps we should be looking at this in a holistic way as well. As was mentioned, we have I think for 3 years in a row have hit records in terms of approving building applications. But what quite often happens is there's no mandate that says that you actually have to have a building permit pulled within a prescribed period of time. So perhaps that might be some food for thought. One just to leave off with is, for example, there's one application that was passed in 1991 for 410 rental units and has yet to have a building permit pulled on it. So I just leave that for a little bit of final food for thought. Have a great night. Thank you. Thanks for everybody attending.
Thank you for that food for thought, Councillor Dasco, and I'll turn it over to Andrew because I believe he has some answers to some basic questions. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, so I've been provided 5 questions to rapidly respond to, so I'll do my very best. So what is as of right? And what as of right is, it's a zoning reference, and it means basically the zoning provides certain permissions to do a particular use on a piece of land. So it might be a single family use, or it might be a 15-story building. If you don't do as of right, you must apply for an application and seek changes to that. So next question, can you build on parkland? No, the answer is no. Do we support one size fits all? No. We support local planning. It's really important to have the local planning context in terms of the planning process. And what is exclusionary zoning, and how will it change the character of our neighborhoods? Exclusionary zoning is a concept that really is referring to zoning again. And basically, it's an idea where we should be intensifying or allowing different uses other than single dwelling uses on particular zones. And that, as I said earlier, we are studying with the city of Mississauga. And then the last question is, why is the clock behind me 1 hour late? And that's because it was daylight savings time and I haven't changed it yet. So there we go. And with that, I'll turn it back to Rob.
Thank you very much, Andrew. The burning questions, why is the clock the way it is? Thank you all for joining this evening and for your important questions. But before we wrap up, I'd like to ask Mayor Crombie to take a few moments to provide some closing remarks, including how you can get further engaged with the province. Mayor Crombie?
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for those rapid responses, Andrew. Yes, it's been COVID. We haven't been here. But anyways, we'll get the clock changed. So thank you to all the residents, more than 300 of you that have attended this evening. Housing affordability is so important for our city, and you heard the passion in each of the councillors and their responses. We need to continue to do whatever we can to help move that needle. But as we've seen, the reason for the housing crisis is complex, and we just can't solve all the problems on our own. Municipalities aren't equipped to solve all the problems on our own. We need all levels of government and all the stakeholders to work together. I would ask you to get engaged on this issue. The step 1 was attending tonight. The government has said that the task force report, which municipalities were not invited to participate on, will be their roadmap for housing policy for the next 4 years. So please make sure you know what is in that report and the legislation, and talk to your MPP about it. Write to them, email them. Also, take a look at the documents on our housing website. That is mississauga.ca/housing. Couldn't be easier. mississauga.ca/housing to learn more. If you have concerns, reach out to your local MPP. If you have questions, you can reach out to my office and I'll streamline your questions and get someone in planning to respond. That's mayor@mississauga.ca. And tell your MPP that you care about your neighborhood and you care about local planning, because let's be honest, your ward councillor is closest to you, to the residents, and knows our communities the best. Planning should stay local. So we put contact information for all the MPPs up on the screen. This information can also be found on the housing website. Please be sure to write to your MPP, write to the ministers of housing, write to the premier. You can call them, email them, just to voice your concerns about this housing crisis. I really want to thank you for being engaged tonight. Please stay engaged. Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
And thank you, Madam Mayor, for those closing remarks. We have come to the end of tonight's session. Thank you to everyone that has attended or participated this evening. At one point, we were over 360 people, so that is a great turnout. I'd like to say thank you to Mayor Crombie, members of council, our commissioners of planning and building, as well as the entire leadership team and the senior staff for being with us tonight. As the mayor said, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing on housing, please visit mississauga.ca/housing. This website is updated regularly as more information becomes available and as more reports are written, so please keep visiting. A recording of tonight's session will also be posted shortly after on this website for you to view and to watch it again and to share with those who might not have been able to attend tonight. It will likely be posted tomorrow morning. And I just want to say, on behalf of the City of Mississauga, thank you and good night.